Good morning, I am Kevin Price. Delighted to be with you, talking to you about you and your business. And on today's program, we have a lot to cover here on today's show. Delighted to have the one and only Lee Kaplan on the program. Lee's a phenomenal legal mind and something of a contrarian like myself, although we take things from a different perspective. And always am delighted to be able to spend time with him, learning more about what's happening on the legal and professional front. Lee, as always, welcome to the program. Tell us a little bit about your firm before we get started.
Thank you, Kevin. We are what's called a litigation boutique in Houston, and we specialize in trials, arbitrations, mediations, and appeals. But it's basically litigation related, that is, disputes.
Yeah, you resolve disputes. That's and by the way, the website over there is skv.com. That's skv.com. Tell me a little bit about in terms of your practice. I think firms like yours are always kind of an interesting indicator of things that are going on in the larger business environment out there. Looking at your practice, look at the things that your partners and you are dealing with. What do you see going on in the larger business and legal culture?
Well, I can tell you about three things that I think are somewhat interesting that are fairly recent in my office. One, we have a lawsuit in which a written contract was executed between the parties, but it was so onerous to one side that they asked for, and according to them at least, obtained oral agreements to modify the contract. They then proceeded, and this is over trucking rates, proceeded for over a year and a half with these modified rates, and then the company which was paying for the freight, this is down in the Eagle Ford, decided that it hadn't agreed to that, and it started withholding money and shorting them on subsequent payments. So now there's a lawsuit in which there's a written contract, there's some emails that seem to support the idea of the oral modification, and there is a year and a half of the parties proceeding along what one side says was the oral agreement. As you can imagine, that creates a problem. That's why it's in litigation. And so I guess my advice to anyone is if you're going to modify a contract, modify it in writing, because otherwise you're going to make money for me and other people in my profession.
You know, what's interesting about that is that, the person who is getting the better rate through a verbal agreement is sitting there going, we got proof of this verbal agreement because he's done it. This person's done it. There's not been a gun next to his head. But the problem is just because he doesn't, or just because he did it, rather, doesn't mean he isn't going to dispute it later. That's the problem.
So that's one thing of interest. Second thing is, because of all the increased activity in the oil patch in particular in Houston, there's a lost generation of skilled technical people in that industry. So there are lots of either new companies springing up or investors starting new companies, and there's really a talent war, which means that people who might have had long-term jobs at Fortune 500 companies, say oil and gas service companies, are being tempted to leave. And when they leave, their former employer usually is upset about it. And, when people leave, they always want to take their contacts and their photographs and a few things that they have on the computer, but it's such an effort to separate things on the computer that they end up downloading everything and taking it. And usually, I think, with pure intentions. They don't intend to use these other things, but the company from which they departed, not surprisingly, is angry about losing them and frequently will do a forensic examination and find out they downloaded a lot of things that are sensitive. And then once again, the lawyers are going to make money off that. So if you're leaving a company, I think you need to be very careful to work with that company, its HR person or an executive, and make sure you have approval for everything you take. And if you're the company from whence people are departing, save yourself some time and effort and make sure that you have a protocol for exiting employees so that they do not take things particularly that might be sensitive, competitive information. For example, how much a particular customer is paying you to perform a service, because if somebody leaves who wants to go after that customer, if they know you're charging $106, they may offer the same service to the customer for $103, and you will lose the customer. And it's simply too much effort to file a lawsuit over that. So both sides have a real interest in making sure that exits are carefully monitored and supervised.
Yeah, absolutely. And the third one?
The third one's a little different, but, you know, as more people in this state do business overseas, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is a federal statute, and it's a federal criminal statute, is very important. We all know that the standards in a lot of companies with which Texas businessmen want to do business are fairly lax. And to get something past a port inspector or a customs inspector, or to get approval for something, you often feel that you've got to grease palms. Well, that is strictly forbidden. I don't care if the Chinese or the French might be doing it. We can't. And things that people might think are very innocuous can subject you to a Department of Justice investigation, and that's sort of like having your teeth pulled out one by one without anesthetic. You don't want to be investigated even if you're innocent. So here's a question, for example. Suppose you get some sort of rights in a country in Africa, and the local warlord or mayor or provincial official tells you the town needs a school. Well, building a school is probably fine, but be careful that you don't contract for the school to be built by a company owned by the son of that official. That's the kind of thing that ensnares people all the time. You have to be extraordinarily careful about the the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. It's a federal statute, it's a federal crime, and the investigation process itself, because you'll be demanded to provide all your documents, is so onerous that you never want to run afoul of it.
Are you involved? Is your firm involved in such a case right now?
We're involved in all three of the kinds of cases I just described. The oral modification of a written contract case, which is now a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. A number of cases we have where employees have departed, and there's a dispute about what they took and whether they used it, and Foreign Corrupt Practices Act investigation. In this case, involving really a charity and some suspicion by the government, which I think is wrong, but a suspicion or a question by the government as to whether or not a local company was using a charity overseas to funnel money to officials in that country. As I say, I don't think there's anything to that suspicion, but who wants to receive a subpoena from a governmental agency to turn over all your documents relating to your business dealings over there? And that includes your emails, your notes, everything. It's extremely expensive and time-consuming to have to undergo that investigation, even if you're perfectly clean and legitimate. So you really
the opportunity costs would be in the probably hundreds of hours, if not more, over time.
Exactly.
Wow. I mean, that's huge. You know, and to me, the one lesson in all of this is that it's really important to have a relationship with a lawyer and a law firm that's more than just fighting back, but preventative.
I think that's right, and our firm occasionally does that, but the truth is there are many very capable lawyers in Houston, business lawyers, who with a little bit of sage advice and a modest retainer can help a business avoid these kinds of problems.
Yeah.
So those are just the three things that have come up. Now, the one thing that seems to have grabbed the attention of all the headlines recently is something that very few lawyers deal with, and that's the issue of the hospital that was keeping the brain-dead mother's body essentially on a ventilator because she was pregnant at the time of her death. And,
and that's something we probably need a lot more time for. That's something has dominated the news the last couple of days. Really, always appreciate what you bring. Really love today's insight, and it's pretty impressive the kind of issues you're dealing in your firm.
Well, it's fun. If you're a trial lawyer, often your experience is a mile wide and your knowledge is an inch deep. I get into cases and I learn more about an industry, and I then refresh my knowledge of the law respecting that particular case every time I work on a case. I really find that cases are never routine because they're always interesting facts, they're interesting people. I find out how things work, and having that kind of intellectual curiosity is what makes my practice fun and interesting.
All right, the firm is Smizer, Kaplan, Veselka, and our guest is Lee Kaplan. Did a phenomenal job as always. We have a blast when you come on. skv.com, just like the initials of the principals, skv.com. And Lee, thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thanks very much. I look forward to talking to you in a couple of weeks.
As we always do, too. All right, when we come back, much more for you. Do want to remind you, best content here shows up over there at usdailyreview.com, including this interview. You'll find that over there as well. Stay tuned for more right after this.